The private jet was quiet, too quiet for a flight that carried the weight of billions. Every polished surface, from the glossy wooden tables to the leather seats, reflected the soft golden glow of overhead lights. The hum of the engines was a distant murmur beneath the subtle clinking of glasses and the careful shuffle of the flight attendants serving champagne and hors d'oeuvres to the ultra-wealthy passengers. At the center of the cabin sat Malik Carter, a black billionaire in his early 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored dark navy suit, crisp white shirt, and polished black shoes. His posture was calm, commanding, the kind of presence that radiated authority without effort. His piercing eyes scanned the cabin, not out of suspicion, but observation. This was a man used to power, in boardrooms, in negotiations, in every deal he touched. Across the aisle, a young white flight attendant, Sarah Bennett, moved with practiced precision. Her uniform was spotless, her hair pulled back neatly. She had served hundreds of first-class passengers, and her efficiency was well regarded. But tonight, there was an unspoken tension in her movements. The way she glanced at Malik carried something beyond routine protocol, subtle judgment, a flicker of irritation, the sense that she was operating above her usual discretion. Malik lifted his glass slightly, acknowledging the gesture of a fellow passenger, but his attention remained on Sarah. He noticed her hesitation, her barely contained disapproval. It was minor, almost imperceptible, but for someone trained to read nuance, it was enough to sense a brewing conflict. The first 10 minutes of the flight had been smooth, service efficient. Passengers quiet, absorbed in their devices, or the luxury of privacy. Malik leaned back, relaxed. Then came the moment that changed everything. Sarah approached him with a tray, wine in one hand, a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, would you like a refill?" she asked. Malik nodded politely. "Yes, please." Her movements were careful, almost mechanical, until she reached for the bottle. That's when a slight miscalculation occurred, a minor bump against the table, a little too close for someone with Malik's awareness. He adjusted calmly, leaning back, but in the same instant, something snapped in Sarah. "I've had enough of your attitude," she said sharply, the voice low but cutting. Before anyone could react, her hand shot forward. She slapped him. The sound, though muffled in the plush cabin, seemed to echo louder than the engines themselves. Passengers froze, glasses trembled on trays, the silverware clinked against plates. Malik sat still for a heartbeat, his calm never faltering. Then he leaned forward slowly, not with anger, not with retaliation, just forward, observing her, analyzing every detail, the misjudged authority, the flicker of pride, the subtle arrogance in her stance. The other passengers whispered softly. Some gasped, some pulled out phones, capturing the moment in hesitation. Malik's voice, low and controlled, cut through the tense hum of whispers. "Excuse me?" Sarah blinked, startled. She had expected shock, but not this measured authority. She had expected flinching, maybe an apology, maybe even fear, but not calm, not observation, not silent judgment. She began, then paused, realizing her action had broken the protocol entirely. Not just the flight etiquette, but social expectation, and most importantly, the unspoken hierarchy of the cabin. Malik leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged. "Do you understand who you are addressing?" he asked quietly. The words were polite, calm, but the weight behind them was palpable. Every passenger felt it, every crew member felt it. For the first time in her career, Sarah Bennett realized she had miscalculated. She had assumed authority in a space where she had none, underestimated power hidden behind polite silence. The cabin fell silent. Phones were lowered. Passengers shifted in their seats, unsure whether to intervene, observe, or remain frozen in awe of the tension building in the air. Malik's eyes did not waver from hers. His calm presence filled the space, commanding attention without a single raised voice. In the background, another flight attendant began to speak softly to the lead crew member, whispering updates about the situation, but the words didn't reach Malik. He didn't need them. He already understood every angle, the error, the intent, the potential fallout. Then Malik spoke again, his voice steady, controlled. "I suggest you reflect on your actions." A simple sentence, a calm statement. But in that moment, it carried more weight than a boardroom full of lawyers, more weight than any social expectation on this private jet. Sarah's face turned pale. Her hands trembled slightly. She had crossed a line, and she knew it. but she did not yet understand how far the consequences would ripple. Malik sat back, folding his hands calmly in front of him. The remaining passengers returned to their own space quietly, the tension palpable, the subtle realization dawning on everyone that what had just occurred was more than a minor cabin incident. This was the beginning of a storm that no one in the room could contain. Within 10 minutes, the ripple would begin, the chain reaction that would dismantle assumptions, upend career hierarchies, and leave an indelible mark on everyone who thought they understood power. And Malik Carter, the black billionaire who had endured hundreds of minor slights in his life, remained calm, observing, calculating, waiting. Because power doesn't scream, it waits for the right moment to act. The cabin air had thickened, tension practically vibrating in the space between the polished leather seats and glossy wooden tray tables. Malik Carter, the black billionaire, remained calm, his hands folded neatly on the armrest, yet his gaze was sharp, assessing every subtle reaction in the immediate vicinity. Every twitch of the flight attendant's body, every glance exchanged with the co-pilot, every shifting passenger became a variable in his silent calculation. Sarah Bennett, the white flight attendant who had crossed the line, stood frozen mid-step, her face pale, hands slightly trembling as she held the empty wine bottle. She had never encountered someone like Malik, a man whose presence didn't just command respect, it demanded instant recognition. The immediate shock of her own actions slowly morphed into a realization that she had misjudged entirely. This was no ordinary passenger. A few rows behind them, other passengers exchanged quiet murmurs. Some held their phones in midair, unsure whether to record or remain discreet. The cabin, previously a place of luxury and casual conversation, had been transformed into a theater of authority and latent threat, and the audience, though passive, was entirely aware of it. Malik's voice broke the tension, low, calm, yet undeniably commanding. "Sit down, please." Sarah blinked, her jaw tightening slightly. She had expected anger, confrontation, maybe even retaliation, but this calm authority, this controlled, measured power, disarmed her completely. She moved, placing the bottle carefully on the side counter, stepping back and lowering herself into a polite, submissive stance. The co-pilot, sitting just ahead in the cockpit, had noticed the interaction. His eyes flicked briefly to the cabin camera feed, then to his colleague. A subtle tension passed between them. They recognized, instinctively, that the passenger they had been instructed to treat politely had just reminded the staff of his unspoken dominance. Malik's gaze swept across the cabin. Passengers who had been leaning forward, curious, now leaned back, suddenly aware that what had occurred was more than a minor disruption. Even the noise of the engine felt muted against the gravity in the air. Malik spoke again, voice calm but unmistakably firm. "I do not wish to make this personal, but actions have consequences." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The weight of his presence amplified every syllable. Sarah's face flushed. Her hands gripped the edges of the service trolley, knuckles white. She had expected confrontation to be loud, messy, and immediate, not cold and strategic. She realized instantly that any further misstep could escalate far beyond a single slap. A message pinged quietly on Malik's phone, resting unobtrusively on the armrest. He picked it up subtly, his eyes scanning the screen for just a moment. The message confirmed what he already suspected. The ripple of the incident would reach beyond the cabin. His assistant had already notified the corporate communications team and legal advisors. Within 10 minutes, the network of executives and associates connected to his deals would receive a detailed report of this incident, complete with context, documentation, and evidence. Malik didn't glance at the passengers or the crew again. Instead, he allowed the situation to unfold. His calm demeanor did more damage than any words could. For Sarah, the realization that this was not a private scolding, but a structural recalibration, settled in like a physical weight on her chest. The cabin's ambience, previously composed of faint laughter, casual conversations, and the soft clink of glasses, had been entirely overtaken by tension. Even the air conditioning seemed to falter in importance, every hum of machinery irrelevant against the gravity of the incident. Passengers began to whisper amongst themselves, voices hushed and careful. A billionaire in first class had been slapped by a flight attendant, but the expression on his face conveyed dominance rather than shock or fury. That alone was enough to make others realize that consequences would be immediate and far-reaching. Sarah tried to speak. I apologize, sir." Her voice wavered, but Malik's calm, unflinching stare froze her words in place. He did not nod. He did not smile. He allowed silence to speak for him. Minutes passed. The plane continued its smooth course, engines steady, passengers restless but silent. Malik leaned back slightly, folding his hands over the armrest, expression composed. He knew that in a matter of moments, this incident would be reported to his entire network, a chain reaction that would jeopardize reputations, careers, and power balances for anyone involved in the cabin's service, starting with Sarah. The co-pilot subtly glanced at him, sensing the command radiating through his calm posture. Malik didn't raise a hand. He didn't signal. He didn't have to. Authority was communicated through presence alone. A notification pinged again. Malik's assistant confirmed via encrypted message. Corporate legal and PR teams had already been alerted. Within minutes, the incident would be assessed, statements prepared, and decisions executed. Careers were about to be terminated, contracts reconsidered, public perception realigned. Sarah's hands trembled. Her uniform, perfectly pressed minutes ago, now felt like a shroud of impending doom. Every passenger in the cabin, whether consciously or not, had recognized the power dynamic, the subtle authority that could crush careers quietly, efficiently, and completely. Malik finally spoke again, calmly, but with finality. Reflect on your actions. Every choice has consequences. No one moved. No one spoke. Every sound in the cabin felt secondary to the gravity of those words. It was as if time itself had slowed, giving the moment a permanence that would outlast the flight. In the back of the cabin, Sarah's colleagues exchanged glances. Their eyes reflected fear, understanding, and the dawning realization that a simple, impulsive act had triggered a chain of consequences that would not only impact the flight, but the global network connected to Malik Carter. And in that quiet, tense cabin, the lesson was clear. Power didn't scream. It didn't demand attention. It waited, controlled, observing, and then acted, not with chaos, but with precision. Within 10 minutes, careers would crumble. Within the hour, corporate reputations would be recalibrated. And the one person everyone had underestimated, Malik Carter, would remain completely, terrifyingly in control. The plane hummed steadily, engines carrying them toward their destination. But the storm had already begun, and nothing in the cabin would ever be the same again. The moment had passed, but its consequences were immediate. The cabin, previously calm with subdued luxury, now vibrated with tension. Passengers shifted nervously in their seats. Some stared at their phones, others leaned slightly forward, whispering. But no one dared make a sound loud enough to break the invisible weight that hung over the interior. Malik Carter remained seated, posture perfect, hands folded lightly across his lap. His eyes scanned the cabin again, noting every subtle shift. Every twitch of the flight attendant's body, every glance between passengers, every nervous movement of the cabin crew was a data point, a variable in the calculation he ran silently in his mind. Authority was not just power, it was perception. And right now, perception had shifted irrevocably in his favor. Sarah Bennett, the white flight attendant who had slapped him, stood frozen. Her face betrayed the first flickers of real fear. The initial shock of confrontation had given way to understanding. She had triggered something far bigger than herself. She had underestimated Malik. She had assumed that compliance and protocol were enough to protect her. But she had misjudged the man behind the calm exterior, the invisible authority that radiated through him without a single gesture. A few rows behind them, other crew members exchanged quick glances. The youngest attendant fidgeted nervously with a serving tray. The senior attendant cleared her throat, trying to regain composure, but the tension was palpable. Even in the hushed luxury of first class, panic was subtle, creeping in unnoticed by those not attuned to the dynamic. Malik's assistant, discreetly seated in the row just ahead, sent a silent alert to the corporate communications team. Within moments, a secure message pinged across multiple devices, an incident requiring immediate escalation. The subject line read, "Cabin incident, immediate executive attention required." The content was clinical, detached, and precise. Within 10 minutes, the information would reach key stakeholders, including PR advisors, legal counsel, and members of Malik's board. The chain reaction had already begun. Sarah's voice wavered as she tried to speak. "Sir, I apologize." Her words faltered mid-sentence, crushed under the weight of his gaze. Malik did not flinch. He did not nod. He simply observed her, allowing silence to amplify the lesson. In this cabin, silence carried authority heavier than any raised voice. The other passengers, both regular and high-profile, felt it. They had witnessed more than a simple incident of misconduct. They had observed power being exercised quietly but absolutely. Cameras on phones hovered but remained in stasis. No one dared break the moment. It was as if Malik's presence had drawn a gravitational field, holding attention and constraining movement. Malik finally spoke, his voice calm but measured. "Reflect on your actions. Every decision has a consequence." The words were concise, almost casual in their delivery, but the resonance within the cabin was profound. It was as if each syllable was weighted with the authority of boardrooms, courts, and deal-making arenas that the passengers could not see but instinctively understood. The cabin crew collectively held their breath. A silent acknowledgement passed through the air. They had miscalculated the depth of his influence. Within minutes, Sarah would understand that this was no ordinary correction. This was a structural consequence, embedded in Malik's unshakable command of his environment. Her misstep was not personal, it was systemic, and the system was beginning to recalibrate. Malik's assistant tapped a discreet notification to him. He glanced down subtly, eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second. Another alert confirmed what he already knew. The incident had been transmitted through secure channels. Legal teams were reading, PR teams were drafting statements, and the ripple of accountability was spreading across his network. The career ramifications for Sarah, immediate and unavoidable, were now in motion. The co-pilot, monitoring the cabin discreetly, sensed the shift. This was no ordinary flight issue. This was the intersection of human error, high-stakes power, and corporate oversight. Even the faint hum of the engines seemed to quiet in response, as though the aircraft itself acknowledged the tension. Sarah's lips parted, but no words came. Her hands shook as she adjusted the tray in front of her. Every muscle in her body reflected the first brush of comprehension. She had crossed the threshold of authority without realizing whose presence she had challenged. The passengers remained still, their attention divided between the unfolding drama and the realization that this was more than a cabin incident. It was a precedent. Within minutes, a notification sounded across multiple devices. Immediate executive review. Action required. Malik's eyes flicked to the screen, then back to Sarah. The clarity in his gaze conveyed everything: observation, calculation, and inevitable consequence. There was no anger, no spectacle, only control. A senior crew member stepped forward cautiously, voice lowered. "Sir, what would you like us to do?" Malik's calm response was almost imperceptible. "Document everything, ensure all reports are accurate, and prepare for follow-up." The subtlety of his command carried an unspoken weight, a silent declaration that the misjudgment would be addressed, and accountability would be executed. Sarah's breathing quickened. She realized that the repercussions of her impulsive action were no longer theoretical. The moment she had slapped a billionaire on his private jet was already cascading through corporate channels, legal teams, and PR systems. Careers, reputations, and contracts were now exposed to immediate scrutiny. Malik leaned back in his seat, composed. His presence had transformed the cabin from a space of casual luxury into an arena of quiet authority. The lesson was clear, and it would be delivered not with emotion, but with structural consequence. In the 10 minutes following her slap, Sarah's error had set into motion a chain reaction that could dismantle professional standing before the plane even landed. The remaining passengers, now fully aware of the tension, returned to their seats, silent. Some stared at Malik with awe. Others glanced nervously at the crew, realizing that power was not measured by loudness or volume, but by presence, composure, and networked influence. Malik's final words for the moment were calm, almost conversational. Every action matters. Even the smallest gesture can trigger outcomes far beyond what is visible. The cabin absorbed the statement. No one spoke, no one moved. The silence reinforced his control, and every member of the crew understood that the consequences of their own actions were now under scrutiny. The plane hummed steadily. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly. Inside, the repercussions had already begun. Within 10 minutes, lives and careers would be irrevocably changed, and Malik Carter's quiet, measured authority would ensure that accountability was not just theoretical, it was inevitable. The notification pings had already begun rippling through Malik Carter's corporate network. Within minutes, his assistants, legal counsel, and public relations team were all aware of the incident. Each had been briefed, A flight attendant had crossed the line on a private jet. But the crucial detail, that Malik Carter's reputation and leverage could turn that minor incident into a seismic career event, had been left intentionally unstated until now. Inside the cabin, Sarah Bennett's hands trembled, her fingers gripped the trolley tighter than necessary. She could feel the weight of the eyes from passengers, from crew members, and most importantly, from Malik himself. Each glance from him was calm, deliberate, assessing not just her action, but her potential for accountability. Every micro-expression, every subtle twitch of her fingers or adjustment of uniform was noted. Malik had been in situations far more volatile than this. He could wait, observe, and then act with precision. A senior flight attendant, noticing the discomfort, approached cautiously. "Sir, what should I do?" The question was careful, polite, attempting to mediate, yet clearly aware of the magnitude of the situation. Malik's calm eyes met hers briefly before returning to the window, studying the night sky outside. His response was soft, but firm. "Document everything. All interactions, times, and passengers' observations. This will be reviewed." Even the co-pilot, glancing at the cabin through the side panel, felt the tension. Malik's presence radiated control without need for physical demonstration. Authority was silent but absolute. In the moments following the slap, the cabin had shifted, a subtle rearrangement of power, invisible to the untrained eye but palpable to anyone paying attention. Outside the plane, corporate systems had already begun recalibrating. Malik's assistants sent encrypted reports to legal and PR departments. Within minutes, Sarah Bennett's actions were no longer a simple breach of cabin protocol. They were flagged as potential professional misconduct, with implications for airline reputation, liability, and media exposure. Any misstep on her part could, and would, be amplified, dissected, and leveraged by those aware of Malik's standing. Back in the cabin, Malik leaned back slightly, eyes closed for a fraction of a second, a tactical pause. Then, deliberately, he opened them. "I will handle this personally," he said softly, almost conversationally, but the weight behind it settled the entire cabin. His calm was more imposing than any anger could have been. The passengers understood. They did not need to hear more. The flight attendants, now visibly nervous, shared uneasy glances, realizing that they were in the presence of someone whose authority extended far beyond the confines of the aircraft. Minutes ticked by. Each second added gravity to the impending consequences. Malik's assistant messaged updates to the corporate team, indicating that press statements, legal reviews, and HR assessments were being prepared. The minor slap had catalyzed a chain reaction. Within 10 minutes, social media, airline management, and business partners would all be aware. Careers would hang in the balance, and the public narrative would be framed before the plane landed. Sarah Bennett attempted to regain composure, whispering to a colleague, I didn't mean..." Her words faltered. The weight of impending accountability stilled her voice. Malik's gaze, still calm and unflinching, had already assessed her intent and competence. Any further attempt at explanation was redundant. The structural consequences were already in motion. Malik's presence extended beyond simple observation. It was instructive. The flight attendant's trembling hands, the subtle tension among the cabin crew, and the whispered conversations between passengers created a feedback loop. His calm authority amplified the discomfort in a controlled and deliberate fashion, ensuring that the response would be both immediate and systemic. Corporate protocols, legal safeguards, and HR processes had all been quietly triggered by his network. Notifications, audit trails, and documentation were being generated automatically. Each report highlighted the seriousness of the breach, the deviation from policy, and the potential reputational harm. Within 10 minutes, Sarah Bennett's actions would not only be documented, but become actionable in a legal and professional sense. Malik Carter's oversight ensured the response would be precise, calibrated, and unassailable. The flight continued smoothly in terms of navigation, but the cabin atmosphere was charged. Passengers remained seated, observing subtle dynamics, sensing the authority that did not need to assert itself loudly. Malik leaned slightly forward, adjusting the documents in front of him. He did not speak, yet the room was aware. Decisions were already being made, consequences already in motion, and careers quietly teetering on the edge of irreversible impact. Sarah's eyes met Malik's briefly. The realization hit fully. This was no ordinary passenger. This was someone whose influence, authority, and power extended across industries, networks, and reputations. The slap had been a catalyst, an inadvertent initiation of a chain of events beyond her comprehension. Her professional status, credibility, and even personal reputation were now directly exposed. A final soft ping from Malik's assistant indicated confirmation. Corporate, legal, and media teams had received the reports. Within minutes, the incident would be escalated formally. The consequences would unfold efficiently, predictably, and without compromise. Malik remained calm, folded his hands, and observed the cabin once more. Authority required no shouting, no spectacle, only measured, deliberate presence. And in that controlled silence, the truth settled. Within 10 minutes, a simple act of impulsive aggression would not remain contained. Careers would shift, accountability would be enforced. And Malik Carter, the black billionaire whose calm authority orchestrated the response, would remain untouchable, his reputation and influence unshaken, his power evident without a single raised voice. The plane hummed steadily, engines constant, yet the tension inside the cabin was a storm in miniature. Malik Carter, the black billionaire, remained seated with absolute composure, hands lightly folded, eyes scanning the room, reading subtle body language like data points in a live simulation. Every glance from Sarah Bennett, every shift of the other crew members, every nervous passenger movement was recorded in his mind. He did not raise his voice, he did not yell, he did not need to. The notifications from his team had already begun cascading. Corporate legal, PR, HR, and his personal assistants were all in motion. Every minute that had passed since the slap was being meticulously documented, compiled, and prepared for execution. Within 10 minutes, the network would have absorbed the incident, assessed it, and begun the restructuring of accountability. Sarah stood frozen, her hand, still gripping the empty wine bottle, trembled. She understood for the first time that she had triggered a sequence she could not control. She had misjudged the authority of a man whose presence radiated command without ostentation. His silence, his calm, and his measured gaze were tools far more effective than any argument or threat. Passengers whispered quietly to each other, sensing the weight of the situation. No one dared speak loudly. No one dared intervene. Even the faint rustle of a seatbelt or a cough seemed intrusive under the invisible gravity Malik projected. In that moment, it was clear. This was not a personal dispute. This was an orchestration of consequence, a carefully measured demonstration of control that left no room for misinterpretation. Malik lifted his gaze towards Sarah. His eyes were calm, deep, and unwavering. Every action has a consequence. Sarah's lips parted. She tried to speak, but the words faltered. Her mind raced, realizing that the simple impulsive act of a slap had already been transmitted through encrypted channels to his corporate network. Within moments, her career, her professional reputation, and potentially her personal credibility were already being evaluated by people she did not even know existed. The co-pilot, glancing at the cabin, recognized the shift. The cabin had been transformed from a quiet luxury environment into a theater of authority. Malik's presence was the central force. It was an invisible hand that had rearranged priorities and recalibrated expectations without a single raised voice. Sarah Bennett understood, finally and fully, the magnitude of her miscalculation. She had acted impulsively, but the consequences had been absolute, precise, and unavoidable. Malik Carter, the black billionaire, had transformed a minor personal affront into a structural correction of professional hierarchy, and all without raising his voice. The plane continued its course. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly, serene and indifferent. Inside, a lesson had been delivered, silently, efficiently, and with precision. In 10 minutes, impulsive behavior had been met with structured consequence, and Malik Carter, calm and unshaken, had once again demonstrated the quiet, absolute power of controlled authority. The cabin fell into a new rhythm. The hum of engines, the soft click of tray tables, the measured movements of passengers, all carried the imprint of the authority silently exercised. The black billionaire had spoken, observed, and executed consequence without spectacle. Careers were impacted. Lessons were learned, respect was ensured, and the narrative of the flight would be remembered, documented, and referenced long after it landed.